In 2006, we lost Ronnie Sox of the famous Sox and Martin racing team. It was a shock to the Mopar world, and we all realized at that moment that we were not going to have our heroes around forever. Soon wrote an editorial in Mopar Collector's Guide referencing how we needed to do a Hall of Fame for the Mopar heroes that we grew up with, to preserve Mopar history for the future generations. As the years went by, I ran into a good friend of mine, Jim Kramer, at a show, and he asked me when I was going to do a Mopar Hall of Fame. I must have looked at him with a yeah right look in my eyes. He proceeded to say, "If you don't do it, no one else will." In my heart of hearts, I knew he was right, so in 2011 I began lining up sponsors and critical people to help me pull something together that the entire Mopar community could be proud of. What we ended up with was a number of Hall of Fame induction dinners that were held Saturday night of each Chrysler's at Carlisle event from 2012 until 2018. The Mopar Hall of Fame will go forward each preceding year in the pages of Mopar Collector's Guide magazine. This is one of those recordings made on one of those incredible nights at the Mopar Hall of Fame at Chrysler's at Carlisle.
The next group is our last group. This group of people are the reason that we're all here. This is the group of people that started Chrysler Racing. They started mostly with the drag racing group. Everybody thought this was a bunch of high-dollar paid engineers that got to race. That really wasn't the way it started. These guys worked for Chrysler. They had a daily job at Chrysler. They were talking today about how on the way to work, they would talk about what they were going to do to the race car that night after they got off work. And then they'd ride home, go eat supper with the wife, hug her neck, and head out the door and work till 11, 12 o'clock at night. And they put these cars together when Chevrolet and Pontiac were the thing at the drag strip, 60, 61 long in there. You had to have a 409 Chevy. You had to have a 421 Pontiac. That was the cars to race. And nobody just really paid any attention to the Dodge. And this group showed up with a Dodge, and people just kind of looked at it, and boy, it wasn't long. They figured out these guys are smart. They've done something here. And this is how all the Chrysler drag racing program got started, and the round track program as well. I think they were involved in a lot of that. But this group is known as the Ramchargers. They are absolutely, I love to be around them. They're some of the most intelligent people I've ever worked with and ever been around. And I had the pleasure of working with a lot of them doing test work and have known all of them over the years. It was just great being a part of what they did, of being able to work with them. I wasn't really a part of what they did, but I got the pleasure of testing stuff at Milan and driving the cars. And these are the guys who made people like Ronnie and myself go fast, because they were the backbone of the Chrysler race program. So I want to bring the Ramchargers up here, and we'll introduce each one of them. Come on up, guys. What I want them to do, don't you sit down. You're not ready to sit down yet. No, come on. I'd like for each one of you to step up here, introduce yourselves, and just give a little description of what your job was with the Ramchargers. The heck with Chrysler, we're racing. and just tell everybody a little bit about what you did and how the history of the Ramchargers came about. And then Dave is going to finish it up and really give us a history of the whole program. Come on, Tom.
Let's start down there.
All right, we'll start. Come on,
Left or
John.
I didn't do anything. Not much. Actually, the greatest thing that happened to me is being involved with these guys back here, because my real job was doing the race work at Chrysler. And I'd managed to stay at Chrysler for 43 years, and the great majority of it was in racing, either powertrain or motorsports. So what I started out doing is being a relief driver when everybody else was asleep, picking stones out and doing whatever anybody else didn't want to do. So that's what I did.
Mike?
I'm Mike Buckle. I came to fresh out of college in '61, so I was from the beginning of the stock cars on up through the blown fuel funny cars. And I started driving in '64 after Herman Mosier, who won Stock Eliminator in '63, retired. And Jim Thornton and I alternated driving right up through the end of our era. Jim Thornton's under the weather. He would like to be here, but he's pretty weak these days, and he just finished a bout with pneumonia. So Jim wishes he was here. I guess a story I'll tell, we all got to tell a story, and we've been doing it all weekend. Tires. In '63, Goodyear decided they needed to get in the race car tire business. So they hired us to test tires. And we tested at Detroit Dragway. The very first test, they brought out something like 14 sets of tires. And they were all on M&H carcasses, but they were all different compounds. And Thornton was driving, and he could lay that car within 200ths every run after run after run. And we had a heck of a time keeping the brakes cool. And that was really squirrely because we had those little 10 by 2.5 inch drum brakes. And they came up with a tire that had a compound that was significantly better than all the others, including the M&H tire, which we used as a control tire. So we got to keep those. And we raced them for a month or more, and then they scheduled another test. So they bring out another dozen or so tires, and they're all Goodyear carcasses, and they're all this same compound. But the same compound on the M&H carcass went faster. And so we got to keep those. And they had like 2/10 on the rest of the field. And we wore those out and then called Goodyear and says, man, we need some more of those tires. We're out of tires. They said, we can't give you M&H tires. Well, we need more of these M&H carcasses with your good rubber on them. So they sent us more tires. And it took them a year to catch up to where M&H was on carcass science. And in the meantime, everybody thought we were running M&Hs because that's what was on the carcass. Oh yeah, the Ramchargers are running M&Hs. Man, that's a hot setup. So that was one of our little secrets that we kept for a while. So that's our tire story.
Hi, I'm Tom Hoover. I want to say two basic words at this point. Hyperpack slant 6, that's one phrase. And the raised B max wedge. We've all celebrated the Hemi on and on and on. I just want to remind everybody that we did some other race engine work that was very successful. The first assignment I got at Chrysler was to work on the little slant 6, little 170 cubic inch engine. And the purpose of the package was to participate in a new NASCAR series that included the so-called compact cars. Now, this was quite a long time ago for most of us. Came out in 1960 as the Valiant. So my first assignment at Chrysler that was related to race was to, I did all the development work on the Hyperpack for Daytona Beach, a circle race, which is very unusual for me. And just wanted to remind everybody that there were other engines that we did that were very successful. That little bugger won the race going. I was in awe, quite frankly. This was an assignment where we were to take a brand new engine and go out there and race against Chevrolet, you know, and Ford. I thought, wow, I wonder if we can really pull it off. So I tried really hard. And that little bugger made just short of 200 horsepower. And we went down. I was the low man on the pole, by the way, on the totem pole. So I didn't get to go to the race, but I got to watch it on TV. And they made a Le Mans start at Daytona Beach down by the lake. That meant that the drivers lined up on one side of the track. The cars were on the other side with the key in it. I don't remember whether the door was open on each car or not, but the guy fired a pistol, bang. Get everybody to run over there, get it. And the first 7 cars to the first corner were Valiant, Hyper Packs, baby. And I knew we were off to the races, I'll guarantee you.
Yeah, but all the Corvairs tipped over.
Yeah, the Corvairs Chevrolets had a flat 6. They put extra carburetors on it. The Falcon was an inline 6 with, excuse me, several carburetors. But boy, we really blew them into the weeds. It was beautiful. One more thing.
You put yourself out of business doing it, though, Tom.
Sorry about that.
Cancel the
The
series.
the series didn't last very long. The Valiants just blew them away. I mean, it was almost ridiculous. I'm going to say another phrase. Max Wedge. Don't you guys ever forget the Max Wedge. That put us on the map on the street in this country. In a very short time, we started out from nowhere. 18 months later, nobody messed with us. In the 1963 race year, we just won everything. I mean, it wasn't even a contest. You know, they'd qualify 36 cars, 1 Ford, 3 Chevrolets, and the rest Mopar. That's all I got to say.
Hi, I'm Tom Coddington. I came to Chrysler in 1961 after finishing college and having a short stint in the Air Force. And again, the club had matured at that point, and they had started running Superstocks, and I got to meet these guys and have lunch with them, and they invited me over to the garage, and I got to work on the car, and cleaning the car and stuff like that. And eventually, Tom let me help him build motors, but I was a part of the group until late 67, 68, when we more or less split up. Part of the group went on and opened up a chain of performance stores and continued to run the dragster and the funny car. The rest of us decided that it was too hard to maintain our positions at Chrysler in Race 2, but the other side of that was that many of us then went to work full-time as racing people in the racing group at Chrysler, and I got to work for Tom later doing the race car development in 68 and through the Pro Stock era. So that was a real challenge. But one thing about the story with the tires, many of your older racers, you knew M&H, you knew Marvin Rifton. He never forgave us for that. Goodyear had painted Goodyear on these tires. And if I'd run into him, and I don't know how long he's been gone, but he was still coming to races a few years ago, and if he saw me, he had to give me a lecture about those tires.
Hi, I'm Dick Skoglin, and I went to work for Chrysler in '65 when I got out of college. In '65, obviously, I had read the magazines. In '63, the Ramchargers, so I knew about them, and I wanted to meet them when I was at Chrysler. And my boss there got a hold of Mike Buckle, and Mike was the first one. He came down to the lab that I was in and invited me over to the garage. And like some of the other guys said, you start by sweeping the floor and cleaning the parts and that. And in '65, they were running both the funny car and the dragster. And I sort of gravitated towards the dragster group, and I spent most of my time helping there, although I was with the funny car sometimes. And so I got through the development with the fuel motors, and through that course of time, we effectively eliminated the 392s as a competition engine with fuel motors. And then I went on. I got drafted, and when I got out of the service in '70, with some of the other guys, we started Ramchargers Performance Centers, and we wound up with 5 stores in Detroit, and we were in business for 35 years. We closed in 2005, so it was a great career for me. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Troy Simonson. I went to work at Chrysler January 2nd, 1958 as a Chrysler Institute student, and spent my lunch times with guys like Pete McNichols and Barnes Daniels and Tom Hoover and Wayne Erickson and Herman Moser, Dick Burke, Bill Robinson, Bill Shope, Maury Lysing, and we eventually couldn't stand just running our own cars. We had to put together some kind of a club project because we were so doggone interested in showing that we could engineer, which many of the guys had already done, like Tom and Wayne and Pete, better drag race cars than the current Fords and Chevys and traditional hot rodders. So we had 2 objectives. One was to beat Ford and Chevy and Pontiac. The other was to show them that we could engineer a drag race car better than the traditional hot rod drag racers. And we built the High and Mighty. And it turned out to be successful. I want to tell you about the first time that I ever heard it fire up. We had fired it up at Jack McPherson's home, his garage, near 10 Mile and Ryan and Warren, and it had run around the block one time before we took it to Detroit Dragway. I guess it did a little bit more than that. The police had something to do with that. Anyway, it was at the '59 Nationals, and there was something wrong with the electrical system, so I was asked to go underneath the car and put the screwdriver on the starter, which I gladly did. And that's where I was when it fired up the first time. Boom! And I didn't even have to go under on a creeper. I think I could do it on my hands and knees, but that was kind of fun. And I also had the opportunity to make that tachometer that is in the car now. There are two parts that were taken out of the original car, and somebody squirreled them away for a while, and they got put into the replica car, High and Mighty 2. One was the tachometer that I had done with the little skull and crossbones and shift dammit up at the shift point. And the other was the intake manifold that Pete did, and it's on that car too. Thank you.
Oops. Yeah, I'm Pete McNichol, and I was one of the very early Ramchargers when we first formed, and I did an awful lot of work on the old High and Mighty. This High and Mighty car was a lot of fun to play with, but it was ugly. Ooh, so ugly. Anyhow, I can recall taking the car out to the track for the first time, and as soon as we pulled in there, everybody kind of stuck their nose up on it and tried to make us feel real bad, because it's such an ugly car. But anyhow, we finally fiddled around there and started the thing up. And the cars were running on the drag strip at the time, zapping back and forth, making a lot of noise. But as soon as that thing started up, that just drowned out everybody else. Next thing we know, we got a circle of people around this car wondering, what in the hell is this thing, And pretty soon they found out. And anyways, from that, I liked building that High and Mighty car. It was a challenge, And I went into fooling around with my own cars then. My choice happened to be the Slant 6. There was a couple of fellows in the club that told me, hey, this thing really pulls a lot of power. Why don't you find a class that you could run in? So I did that, and I was very, very successful for approximately 6 years. I ran the car, ran various cars. NHRA changed the rules on me so damn many times that it kind of disappointed me a little bit. So why are they picking on me? Well, they were picking on the Ramchargers too, but in any case, it seemed like every year or two I had to build another car just to be in class. But the little Slant 6 was quite an engine. I ran both the 170 and the 225 versions, had them in different cars. Anyways, by the time everything was over with, I had, after 6 years of running, I had set 17 different NHRA national records in various classes with this Slant 6 powered car. That was quite a feat. I also took a street eliminator for Division 3 one year and a runner-up for the same title the following year, and that made me pretty happy. But anyways, Slant 6 cars are a lot of fun. You can develop a lot of horsepower out of something that would kind of surprise you. My last Slant 6 car, I know, was pulling very close to 300 horsepower, and that's quite a feat for it. But anyways, fun is fun, and I sure had a lot of it. Thank you.
Well, I know I shouldn't try to follow that, but my name is Barnes Daniels. I left North Carolina State College in 1955, went into the Air Force, and then joined Chrysler Institute. I had a couple of previous classmates at North Carolina State that went to Chrysler, and I had, back in those days, you had 5, 10 different choices as far as a job coming out of an engineering school. But I had made up my mind that I wanted to go to Chrysler, so I did. And in '57, when I came back from Alaska, I bought a '57 Plymouth, the cheapest thing that they made with a V8 engine. Of course, in Alaska, you didn't have much chance to spend your money, so I saved all of mine and went up there and went into class and quickly, I don't know, picked up that bug that they had of performance. At that time, and I guess recently, more recently, you would have 3-month assignments in various departments around engineering. It was a great program. Some of our classmates would go to Ford for their, say, undergraduate work, and then go to GMI for their graduate work, their 4 years of training, and then they would come to Chrysler for the master's degree. So that was a great thing. I helped with the, lucky, I'm a very lucky individual. I happened to get a permanent job in the Central Engineering Division, and I was sitting beside the father of the Hemi. So, that rubbed off on me. All of my skills came, by osmosis or something, I guess. I was assigned to the Plymouth A engine to do the development work, that of coming up with new carburetors and camshafts and things like that. I helped with the high and mighty. All of us had a particular assignment, a field to work in. Maybe it was exhaust or suspension. But I had this only 2-year-old car, and I got the bug so bad that I realized that you had to park that car and dedicate that car to racing if you wanted to win. And so I did race the early A engine, which is not it was a 318 design, but not the 318, the wedge combustion chambers. So I was a victim of, I'll be honest with you, I was a victim of the first white-collar layoff at Chrysler. I was the last one in the engine development lab and the first one out in Christmas of 1960. So I continued to be in contact with people like Tom, and when I'd go back to Detroit, my wife was working at Chrysler Missiles, so Bill Shope lined up a blind date for this quiet Southern boy, and I got hypnotized. So, and my wife says, "No, you didn't get hypnotized. You were 6 years older than I was, and I had all this worldly experience." But that's. I continued with the A engine when I left Chrysler. I went to Texaco, and I had my own short ram intake manifold, a very unique one. It was like this, and had 2 plenum chambers, one on each side over the rocker covers, and 6 YH carburetors, the same that we used in the Chrysler Marine. In those low silhouette engines, they had a horizontal carburetor. So that looked pretty impressive when you go to the drag strip and had those 6 side drafts. Then I realized that I didn't know what the distribution was, fuel-air ratio going to each individual cylinder, so I eventually put 8 side draft carburetors on it, and that was that really killed its streetability, but it looked wild. I mean, people thought I had Webers on it, but so that's really my story. Thank you very much.
Before we bring Dave up, I want to say something. You think about guys like Ronnie and myself that were racing, and we would go to Milan, Michigan to test, because that's where Chrysler ran the test program. And these guys were running the test. Mr. Hoover, Mr. Coddington especially, they were always there, and they would tell us, try this, let's do this. And boy, we paid attention, because at the end of the day, most of the time we left there going faster than we did when we got there. And that was the thing that Ford and Chevy didn't have. They didn't have people like this doing the work, doing the thinking, and then letting us do the driving and figure out what was faster. Now, Dave's coming up. Dave put the book together. We were the Ramchargers. If you haven't read the book, you have really missed out on something if you are a performance-oriented person. I've read 2 books in 20 years. That was one of them. My wife, Marie, of 45 years sitting here, said that was the best babysitter she ever had for about 3 or 4 days. Kept me quiet. That's a pretty good trick, let me tell you that. But it's an excellent book. I would highly recommend it. They've got it on tape now, and Dave McClellan read it. And if you don't know Dave McClellan, if Dave walked in over there and said hi to somebody, everybody in the room would think he was talking to him, because he's just got one of those voices that just carries. And he was an NHRA announcer, great guy. But Dave's going to spend some time telling about the history of the Ramcharger.
Thanks a lot, Herb. My name is Dave Rockwell. I was sort of Boy Friday for the group. I had the great pleasure and opportunity as a kid coming into high school and college to get involved with them, to do whatever I could do to be helpful whenever I could. The experience of it just blew me away. The excitement of traveling with these guys, of working with these guys, of getting to know these guys, of being around the sport at, I think, probably the most exciting time in the history of the sport, in the early to mid 60s, later 60s, early 70s. And one of the things that occurred to us here not so many years ago is that it was all slipping away, the history, the excitement. And to me, that was just something to try to do something about. My wife had suggested I might, after a ceremony we've been involved with, try to put it down on paper, try to write something about it. And so I decided to try to do that with the help of everybody here. We spent about 10 years trying to do it. And with the overall goal of really just kind of telling the story of how the group really functioned, how over the years it evolved, and some of the behind-the-scenes sort of stories, and probably just as importantly, to try to capture some of the excitement and to try to explain a little bit about the drama of that. The book came out. It's been a real nice success. It's the best-selling book SAA's ever had, and we're real proud of that from the standpoint of just telling our story, but also hopefully promoting the Mopar image and giving credit to a lot of other people who are involved with us along the way. And so what I'd like to do, though, tonight is we were talking at a presentation we recently were at the Chrysler Museum that, we were just such a lucky group of guys. And if, the definition of luck has something to do with where preparation meets opportunity, the guys had enough preparation in some respects, having had the training and background and enthusiasm at that point in their lives, to finally go out and do something that they'd been wanting to do all their lives, that up until that moment they really hadn't understood quite what it would be. Along with the circumstances of Chrysler and the sport and everything in the world, they just sort of came together, and that there were several really critical points that had they not been the way they were, the Ramchargers maybe would have really never been much of anything, or the products that came out of the group and the accomplishments would have never probably happened. And so what I thought I'd do tonight is just try to very quickly run through an overview of the club, while at the same time taking note of a few of these key moments that really made the Ramchargers become the Ramchargers, and the products that kind of spun out of the group and the accomplishments happen. So this is our book cover. We have to start out by quickly acknowledging John and Horace Dodge, Walter P. Chrysler, in that it was their DNA in ways that are embedded in the nature of the body Chrysler, if you will, that involved teamwork, people taking ownership in things that they could accomplish together, and in general, just really working together. Also, the opportunity to do things individually and it's sort of a spirit of buccaneering that I don't think was ever present either in the Ford Motor Company or in General Motors by virtue of the people who had started them. But this is something that I think is still a characteristic of the nature of Chrysler, such that when a group might come along like the Ramchargers, there would be something in there that would allow it to happen, that in any of the other two companies, I don't think it would have, much less maybe Toyota. We won't. Anyway, and it had kind of become fallow in the corporation, but when the Ramchargers came along, there was sort of an opening for it to be reignited, and it was at that time. Another key thing was a project called the A311, which was a motor that was developed for Indianapolis when stock blocks were being promoted at the time. Unfortunately, it was greatly successful. Invitation canceled. It was never really able to compete at Indianapolis. But the hallmark of the project probably was the discovery and the development of the ram tuning principle. And by the time these guys got to Chrysler Institute, which is where they really met, which was a very selective graduate engineering program at Chrysler, most of this technology was on the cutting room floor, and really there wasn't a feel within the company of what to do with it. These guys knew what to do with it. They traveled back and forth to work on Woodward Avenue, were getting their brains beat out by the Chevys and the Fords, and they began to experiment, putting them in their cars, as Barnes was just detailing here. Tom Hoover had one. Numerous guys in the club had their own cars, projects, and were running them at the track. Quickly, though, they realized they were going to have to congeal into a group project to really be competitive on a national scene and to incorporate as many of these concepts as possible. This is the high and mighty under construction. Involved the ram tuning principle, the first tunnel ram manifold, the same principles being applied to the exhaust system, except in some respects in reverse with the megaphones, raised center of gravity to try to allow a Hemi-powered car to compete against the lighter Chevy-powered cars with reasonable weight transfer, multi-link rear suspension, and it actually had a degree of altered wheelbase. The finished product was a good record setter, not a particularly good race car. There was a hole in the torque curve as a result of the pipes that really wasn't understood very well at the time, and reset the national record several times into 1961, when it dropped a valve. NHRA changed the height requirement for the motor down to 24 inches because actually the motor was 36 inches. The carburetors were 6 feet off the ground. At that point, the guys, the budget was low, but they had noticed at the 1960 Nationals that the stock cars, the super stocks, were allowed to run through the mufflers for the first time. There was incredible crowd reaction. So they said, what if? What if we were able to get one of the manufacturers within the company involved? They went to Plymouth, pitched the idea of getting a car and some parts to be able to participate at the 61 Nationals. They said, absolutely forget it. We make passenger cars. We don't make race cars for idiots. Serendipitously, another one of those points. Gail Porter, who was mentioned here earlier, happened to be sitting in the meeting, an adjutant of who was to become the Ramchargers patron saint, Frank Wiley. The phone rang at the Ramchargers desk shortly after the meeting, Jim Thornton's desk actually, I think, and he invited them over for a meeting. They pitched him. He said, at that point, I interviewed him about 7 years ago for the book. He was 95 years old at the time, sharp as a tack, Harvard graduate, president of his school board, owning a vineyard out in California on top of a hill. And he said, you know, these guys came in and they pitched this thing to me about drag racing. He said, and I knew by going into the newsstands that they were being flooded with all these magazines from California, and there really wasn't much concerning NASCAR. So he said, sure, what do you need? And they said, well, you know, we could use a car and some parts to go to Indianapolis. He said, well, I've got a car going destined for NASCAR downstairs. How about if you use that? They said, great. They took it to one of the guys' backyards, took it to Indianapolis, with the only Chrysler car in the field, began wading through eliminations, ran into the old reliable, I believe in the second round, as Tom Hoover would say from the folks in the East, the car that could walk on water, beat him, raced Mickey Thompson in the quarterfinals, Mickey Thompson driving the car himself after he replaced Hayden Proffitt just for the run. Top speed car of the meet, Hayden's car, Mickey Thompson's car beat Mickey Thompson. In the semifinals, had to race Dyno Don Nicholson, who was coming off the Winter Nationals win. Lost. The car wouldn't shift. There was difficulty with the transmission. The guys were back in the pits. And again, another one of these moments where, had it not happened this way, the Ramchargers really maybe would have never matured, nor the products that were to ensue would have happened. But there was a lull in the action, and the crowd had gotten so into the competitiveness of the car, and the crowd had begun chanting for a rematch. NHRA approached the guy, said, will you run a match race with Nicholson? Never happened before, has never happened since. The guy said, sure, maybe it'll shift this time. So they reran, and yes, this is the picture. It was in Hot Rod magazine and all across the country. Across the country. The car won. It shifted, and it was based upon the success of this, where Jim Thornton would say Nicholson had won the event what it was like the Ramchargers had won the race. And with it, the strength of that material, Frank Wiley, Byron Nickel, the president of Dodge, Jack Sherpar of product planning, were able to go upstairs, and once again one of those moments happened. There was Lynn Townsend, who was the new president of Chrysler, 42 years old, much younger than most of these guys, had teenage sons. And they had been telling him in no uncertain terms how shabby and embarrassing it was to go to high school with the performance of these Chrysler cars. And based upon their apparent assertion of this and showing him this picture in Hot Rod magazine, shortly thereafter, Tom Hoover's phone rang. and the word apparently circulated within the company. This was a guy who knew something about this, and there was this group of guys there. He was given the assignment of creating a motor to make the cars competitive with Chevys and Fords. The Max Wedge was that project that Tom was alluding to before. The first year, at that point too, he needed to gather a cadre of people around him to help him begin to develop that motor. And that cadre, of course, would have been the folks in the Ramchargers who had that experience after hours on their own tab. And this was the beginnings of the Chrysler Race Group. The motor went through the 413 and I think 4 more iterations. Great success. This was the 413, though, at 1962 Nationals. At the end of the first season of those cars, in the final against Hayden Proffitt, did not win. Undeterred, returned with a 426 package at Stage 1 426, and did win the Winter Nationals, first win for a Chrysler car, first automatic transmission win, top speed and low AT. The cars were very successful through the 63 season. The team repeated as the Nationals champion, raced itself in the class. And this really whet the appetite, though, of the upper management of Chrysler that, hey, maybe we really can be successful with this kind of stuff in racing. However, their perception was that drag racing was basically greasy kid stuff. And the real racing went on at Daytona. And so the call was placed down to Tom and a few of his critical colleagues about what it would take to develop a motor that could win the next Daytona 500 race. He proposed, along with Frank Bilk, who made this drawing on March 23, 1963, to put a Hemi head on the RB wedge. And as they say, the rest is history. At Daytona, the cars went 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 5, 6, and the drag racing piece of it, though, is a little bit less well known. Some drag racing cars were created. Ramchargers had one. The motors were screwed together by M&I rather than the group, taken to the West Coast, tested before the 64 Winter Nationals, and were slow. Cars were not raced at the Winter Nationals. It was left to the team to sort out the new Hemi, and there were some adjustments in the fuel system with carburation and so forth that allowed the car on April 20th, 1964, first time the car was run in anger at Detroit Dragway, lowered the AFX record, first run down the track by half a second, and the 64 season was really the proliferation of the Hemi. Let's see, where are we at? At the same time, the group also began running the motor in top fuel. It was the first engine, the late model Hemi, in top fuel, lots of parts breakage, lots of learning curve, but it set the record still at about 90% of the tracks it raced at. It also had low AT and top speed of the meet. At the U.S. Nationals, low AT or top speed of the meet. Actually, low AT all 3 years, 65, 66, 67, and I believe top speed 2 of those years. You can see in the picture, we've got Dan Mancini kneeling, that's Tom Coddington. Standing to the left, Jim Thornton in the center, and Dan Knapp, who was the godfather of the Ramchargers top fuel dragster, a longtime dragster guy in the Detroit scene, Chrysler tech guy at Woodward Garage, responsible, had his hands on every car you can think of, that package car that came down the line as a mechanic. That was at our garage on Hilton Road. But at the end of the 64 season, Ford had said enough. They were bringing out their overhead cam motor, that had I think Mike would say, a 25 to 50 horsepower advantage. And we're putting it into their subcompact cars. It wasn't Chrysler's game plan ever to run subcompact cars. They really wanted the motors in the proper chassis bodies. And so, but there had to be some sort of solution then to stay competitive, because we weren't going to get the double overhead cam 4-valve motor that there had been some discussion of. Jim Thornton, as Dick Maxwell would say, saw a real solution in moving the wheels. The wheels had begun to move a bit in 64, but by 65 they'd gone to the rear door and the front door, and this was really the beginning, of course, of the funny car. This was the engineering test car. Some people think funny car relates to technology. It really does not. It relates to politics. When the cars came out, Ford really thought they'd gained the high ground. With evidence that they hadn't, they forbade their racers, and Buddy can tell you about this, I'm sure, to race the Chrysler cars. In fact, it got to a point where I think Buddy and company were doing things like putting ads in drag news for any promoter that could get them a race with a Ford. That didn't last for too long. The Fords finally had to come out and fight, but they weren't terribly successful. And those cars were just really tough to beat. This was our 65 funny car, first funny car in the 8s. And this was later in the season on nitro. But it really began the evolution of the funny cars. They went in 66 and 67, went to steel tube chassis. We went that route. Finally with a blower on the 67 car. They had a unique suspension. I think Mike drove it the last time. It went 194. But at that point in the history of the Ramchargers, it was a fork in the road. We realized that the car was probably going to be going 200 next year, the following year, and it really could no longer be a part-time, after-hours activity. The guys were either going to have to quit their jobs or go drag racing full-time. And the majority of the guys had really invested a lot in their educations and decided to go back into the company and see what they could do in terms of developing package cars and such. 4 of the guys went out on their own, forming Ramchargers Racing Engines, eventually, as Dick Skoglund was mentioning, Ramchargers Performance Centers, raced the top fuel car in 69 when it was AHRA champion, 68, 69, in 70, built a Woody funny car, first 6-second funny car, and had a series of funny cars in 71, 72, and 73, and the beginning of 74. That group came to the same sort of situation where the expenses of running the car really were clashing with the notion of really making a living in life, and they really were growing up, and they needed to make a decision, either expand the business, grow the stores, or give up the funny cars. There was a very successful race engine component to this business where a number of guys were running our motors and their super stocks and funny cars and top fuel cars. And so that was the decision, and they withdrew from racing at that point. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, within the company in 68, the rest of the guys, or a number of the other guys, got involved in the package car programs. Of course, the 68 Hemi Barracudas and Darts, today still competitive. As Dick Maxwell liked to say, still running a class by themselves. There were 69 and 70 package cars, the 446 packs, the AAR Barracudas and Challengers and so forth. But by 1970, NHRA had taken note, and to their credit, one time they really were with sort of the rhythm, I think, of the sport, where the 68 Barracudas and Darts were really often being matched on a heads-up basis with the Camaros like a Bill Jenkins, the shotgun motor Mavericks of Nicholson. And the decision was made to go pro stock racing. Actually, pro stock class was created. This is a picture off the 72 cover of Hot Rod Magazine of Tom there in the back, Tom Hoover in the back. Teddy Spehar had been brought in to help to do some of the work with the car and with his company. And of course, you guys all know about the Motown Missile. It was developed as the test car for the pro stock effort. The idea being that they couldn't always bring racers to Detroit to see what was going on in the development program. These guys, Al Adam and Tom Coddington and Tom and so forth, were involved with. But they could take a car on the road and demonstrate its performance and what they were learning. This was the cutting edge car. Oftentimes the low ET and top speed car. Of course, Ronnie and Buddy and were terrifically successful as racers and really were the kings of that period. In fact, Tom likes to say that if we had to race the Russians for everything, he'd want Ronnie Sachs driving and Teddy Spehar building the motors. So Ronnie Sachs was without peer. In fact, I think Tom likes to call him Magnus Sachs, Ronaldo Magnus Sachs. That's it.
Okay.
Anyway.
As long as it's got a Sachs in there, I'm happy.
All right. We'll leave Ronaldo out. But by 73 and 74, as Buddy has mentioned, there was continued weight put on these cars to a point that they really couldn't be competitive. He told a story this afternoon about looking Jack Hart in the eyes and saying, hey, what are we going to do in order to be able to be competitive here? And don't you care about us? And Jack Hart basically said, no, we don't care about you. And Dick Maxwell told a very similar sort of story. So by the end of 74, as Tom would say, he realized it was a waste of the company's money to continue anymore. And at that point, that program discontinued in ways. This is really the end of sort of, you would consider, the golden era of the Ramchargers' real direct activity in these type of programs. It was a period of about 15 years that it occurred over. And our last shot here is in this picture, you are standing now on the starting line of what was the busiest drag strip in the country, probably east of Long Beach, California. That is the Detroit Dragway today. Down at the end there, that trucking terminal is where the finish line used to be. And this is where the Ramchargers essentially ran their first lap and their last lap. But not to despair. We can look around ourselves today, I think, at an event of this type and around Carlisle and so forth, and see the children and the grandchildren and maybe even the great-grandchildren of a lot of the efforts that a lot of these people put in, and I think can feel pretty good about that. So thank you very much. We really appreciate the honor of being here.
If you like this video, please smash the like button. And if you want to see more videos like this one online, hit the subscribe to Mopar TV button. It's totally free. Also, if you'd like to support the Mopar Hall of Fame and to vote for future inductees, go to MoparCollectorsGuide.com and subscribe to the only Mopar magazine that matters. A portion of your subscription will go to help keep Mopar history alive for future generations.